We were told to go to school, get a job, buy a house, then retire, and this is what was promised to us as long as we just worked hard. But now, getting degrees feel like we're being robbed, jobs are almost impossible to get, housing prices are the most expensive they've ever been, and half of Gen Z is financing groceries because we can't afford anything without debt. Back in the 70s and 80s for boomers, the US economy was growing rapidly. A high school diploma could get you a job, a single income could cover a mortgage, and if you stayed loyal to a company, you would often get a pension and health care for life. The deal was simple. Give your 20s and your 30s to the company, and in return, when you were older, the system would catch you. And it worked. Boomers now control more than 50% of wealth in the US, while making up less than 20% of the population. And everyone grew up being told to follow the same formula, but as we got older, we realized that things didn't work like they used to because they broke it. Boomers entered a job market where a diploma wasn't mandatory and office jobs weren't being offloaded to AI. Today, Gen Z is walking into an economy where half of new graduates end up underemployed or working in fields that have nothing to do with their degree. Even teenagers are struggling to find summer jobs, which give them the experience they're supposed to have for the future. Not to mention the fact that now college graduates on average leave school with $40,000 in federal student loans. But things get worse because even with this overpriced degree, chances are you still can't get hired with it. Recently, a survey found that 90% of employers will not hire new graduates, citing they would rather fill the positions with freelancers, retired former employees, AI, or leave the position unfilled. And the graduates who do get hired, well, 78% of them get let go within a year. Now, to be fair, boomers have dealt with their fair share of issues too. There were oil shocks in the 70s, double-digit interest rates, recessions in the early 80s, but the difference is they weren't competing for jobs against AI, let alone the fact that now many positions are being outsourced to remote work in foreign countries for pennies on the dollar instead of hiring Americans. To make matters worse, now for people trying to get a job, it's normal to send hundreds or thousands of applications. And chances are you'll probably get ghosted because the job listing was fake, the position was never intended to be filled, or your resume was thrown out by a hiring software because you used the wrong keywords. But let's say you defy the odds. You get through school, you land a job, and now it seems like there might actually be a future to work for. Until you realize the fact that the cost of living is insane. Getting around means you'll need a car, and with that, an average loan payment of between $530 and $750. But unfortunately, these loans come with steep interest rates, further pushing you to the edge of your financial limits. But cars aren't the only thing that have gotten insanely pricey, because other essentials like food have gotten just as bad. Let's look at something as basic as groceries. In the mid-70s, a pound of beef in grocery stores averaged about $1.89. By 2000, around $1.55, but today's data shows it averaging $6.32 a pound, with some cuts going up to $8.28. Bread tells the same story. In the 80s, a loaf was about 50 cents. In 2000, just under $1, now around $1.84. But even things like dairy have gone up too. Milk used to be roughly $1.57 per gallon in the mid-70s to about $2.75 in 2000, and now it's over $4 a gallon. While prices rose, wages failed to keep pace, especially for young workers who are now feeling the pain. Because rent, food, transportation, and debt payments are taking up a bigger slice of every single paycheck. That's why, even with a full-time job, 2/3 of Americans now say they live paycheck to paycheck. So what happens when the paycheck isn't enough? People start going into debt. By late 2025, the average American carried about $6,500 in credit card debt. But the people falling more than 90 days behind on their payments? Well, from 2023 until 2025, delinquency rates went from less than 8% to above 12%, with young borrowers showing up in those numbers more than you would expect. So what do you think businesses do when they see people already struggling? Do they try and help, or do you think that they try and profit from them? Buy now, pay later apps like Klarna and Afterpay are filled with bright colors and super happy fun marketing about breaking single payments into smaller ones to make things easier. But in reality, these services are training wheels for racking up debt. In 2024, roughly 44% of Gen Z reported using buy now, pay later, and by 2025, more than half of Gen Z use it more than traditional credit cards. But the scariest part is that it's not just being used for shopping. About a quarter of all buy now, pay later users across all ages are now financing food, while a shocking 41% of them made at least one late payment in the last year. And you're probably thinking, how is buy now, pay later bad when you could break up one big payment into smaller ones? surely that's good, right? Well, the problem is that some buy now pay later loans may carry rates as high as 37%, while credit cards have an average interest rate of around 25%, which means things are going to be way more damaging for all the people who can't make payments. Meanwhile, older generations keep telling us to just budget better, to live below our means, and to spend less, which, to be fair, there is some truth to, until you realize that no matter how much we hear this, it doesn't change the fact that housing has become the most unaffordable it has ever been. This house was sold brand new for $24,000, but now it's worth about $2.4 million. And to make matters worse, America's average home price to income ratio now hit an all-time high of 5.8. And in the same amount of time, the median price of homes jumped by roughly 407%. And the house that I just showed you that went from $24,000 to $2.4 million, well, it increased in price by 9,700%, which is insane to think about. But things still get worse. In 1960, the average age of first-time homebuyer was 23, but now it is currently the oldest it's ever been at 40 years old. And guess what? To try and solve this issue, the US government floated the brilliant idea of intergenerational debt, aka the 50-year mortgage. Imagine buy now, pay later, but for a house that you're never gonna be able to pay off. Just for fun, let's say you have a $600,000 principal at 6%. For a 30-year mortgage, you'd be paying about $3,600 a month and about $690,000 in total interest. But if you went for the 50-year mortgage, sure, you would save about $400 a month on your payments, but now you would need to pay a shocking $1.29 million on interest alone. To make matters worse, this will actually cause housing prices to increase in value. Because lower monthly payments mean more people can afford the property, meanwhile sellers will increase prices, developers will increase building costs, and banks will hand out more loans, meaning the vicious cycle continues. So let's assume the situation where you can't afford a mortgage and now you'll need to rent. Well, 3 out of 5 Gen Z renters are considered rent burdened, and according to a survey, 79% of Gen Z adults say owning a house feels like a possibility that's financially out of reach. And now, some people aren't even willing to pay rent because they've realized the only way to actually save money and to truly try and get ahead is by living at home with their parents. Today, about 1 in 3 adults in the US are still living with their parents, and between 1960 and the 2020s, the amount of 18 to 24-year-olds living at home has increased from 35% all the way up to 56%. But in my opinion, this isn't even the worst part, because the thing that I take the biggest issue with is the fact that now, due to all the greed and financial irresponsibility, millions of people my age are struggling to start a family. In the 1960s, the average age of first marriage was 22 for men and 20 for women. By 1990, it had crept into the mid-20s. In 2010, it was around 28 for men and 26 for women, but as of 2024, it is now roughly 30 for men and 28 for women. The oldest it has ever been, also cutting fertility rates nearly in half. And now, some adults are even choosing to be unpartnered altogether, because 40% of 25 to 54-year-olds are single versus 29% back in 1990. And truly, the saddest thing of all is that these statistics are primarily due to financial reasons. And now, 1 in 4 millennials and Gen Zers say they aren't gonna have kids due to their finances. Boomers grew up in a world where marriage and kids in your early 20s wasn't just normal, but expected, with the economics to support it. Today, we're living in 500 square foot apartments, seeing things get more and more unobtainable, all while having a wage that is barely keeping up with inflation. And I think I could speak for a lot of people here. We don't just feel ignored, we feel lied to. Instead of things getting better, every headline feels like a new record. Higher rents, higher grocery prices, higher interest payments, higher everything except our sense that anyone in charge is actually listening. In 2020, when the economy had crashed, governments printed cash like never before.
You simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We printed digitally.
Stimulus checks, bailout, whatever it took to keep the system from collapsing, and sure, it saved the markets and a lot of retirements, but these actions also turbocharged the value of assets, pricing out the next generation. And today, governments are stuck with making a decision that will decide our future. If politicians choose to finally rip the band-aid off and let the bubble pop, they'll destroy the comfortable retirement they promised their older voters. But if they panic at every sign of pain like they've been doing, they will pump even more money into the system inflating things further, making things infinitely worse for future generations. Only time will tell. Will they choose the people who have already made it and are going into retirement, or finally give the next generation a fair chance like they were promised as a child?